And welcome to our All Cardinals podcast. I'm Howard Balzer. Alex Weiner is here, Millard Thomas, as we have got a lot to talk about as we are, almost a week out from the Cardinals' loss to the Packers on Thursday Night Football, heading towards a second game of the season against the San Francisco 49ers. And of course, we're recording this and doing this on trade deadline day in the National Football League. So a lot to unpack, a lot to discuss as the Cardinals get their first loss of the season, and a strange game in a lot of ways. Obviously, the ending was one of the most unusual, perhaps, that many of us have seen. And of course, I've seen a lot more games than you guys, but that was quite the end to that game. And I'll say this: I don't know if we will ever find out what truly happened on it. But to me, it seems pretty clear that Kyler Murray decided to change the play. It was supposed to go to the left. He decided to go to A.J. Green, who was all alone on the right side of the field with Rasul Douglas, who was on the Cardinals practice squad for about 3 weeks earlier in October. A.J. Green never got the message. But here's the thing that I don't think any of us will ever understand or comprehend. Even if A.J. Green thought the ball was going to the left side, what are you doing running into the end zone towards the cornerback and never turning around? Because even if he just turns around not expecting the ball, even if it's incomplete, there's no damage done. You still have third down and another play and a potential fourth down if you have to kick a field goal and go to overtime. So, guys, I don't know if we'll ever understand unless A.J. Green decides to come clean at some point and say what he was thinking. I don't know that we'll ever know what really happened in his mind on that play and why he didn't turn around in the end zone. One last point on that. Hey, how many times have we seen a quarterback look to one side of the field to have a play, doesn't see anything there, and then look somewhere else? Well, A.J. Green's got to be thinking that, I would think, but obviously he wasn't.
I mean, it almost looked like he was blocking to a certain extent. And so that must be a real drastic, miscommunication up at the line of scrimmage there. I wonder if A.J. Green will be made available to, the media this week, or if he could be requested so we can kind of figure out exactly what happened. Who knows? He might just say it's a miscommunication and we're going to move on from it, just like Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury essentially said. Maybe if the Cardinals win the Super Bowl or something, and there's like a documentary on the season, and like in 10 years, somebody sits down with A.J. Green, maybe we'll get an answer then. But yeah, bizarre. But I guess they're going to chalk this one up to, for whatever reason, message wasn't, relayed or he didn't hear it or something like that. And not a huge deal. They're 7-1. They still are, have the top of the division. That's where they wanted to be at this point in the year, and time to move on. But definitely a win that they left on the table just with that one play. Pretty miraculous of them, and not even miraculous, just impressive for them to come back for when they really looked like nothing was going on offensively for a lot of the game, and then they really flipped a switch, and that final drive was masterful up until the very end. And they had a golden chance to do it. So, definitely a lot of negatives to take from that, play, from that game. But in the end, they gave themselves an opportunity, and they continue to do so even when they don't have their best performances.
And Millard, before you jump in, you mentioned the last drive. The two drives before that, they scored touchdowns on both of them when they were down by 2 scores to get within 1 score, and they had 234 yards on the last 3 possessions of the game. It was that was impressive, and you just wonder where was that at other points in the game.
Yeah, because this Cardinals offense really started heating up toward the end of the game, like you were just saying. The first half, I think they only had one play go for over 20 yards, and that was that big Hopkins catch. Like, they weren't getting the explosive plays in this game like they normally do. It was a lot tougher to get that easy offense. And late in that fourth quarter, A.J. Green was like the guy. Like, he had that big 3rd and 10 catch when they were backed up in their end zone to keep the drive alive. Like, it was so shocking to see A.J. Green make that play, because with Hopkins kind of in and out this game, A.J. Green was basically the guy, and he was stepping up to the plate. The whole season, he's been stepping up to the plate. He's kind of having a resurgent season for this Cardinals team, because I was one of those naysayers that was like, AJ Green's done. He's washed. After watching him last year in Cincinnati, I didn't think AJ Green had much left in the tank, but he's proved me wrong. So I was so surprised to see AJ Green have that miscommunication. And if you are able to ask him that question, Alex, I don't think he's going to answer it. I think you're going to get a Marshawn Lynch type answer, because that dude was straight out the stadium right after the game. He was answering no questions about that. And I can't blame him, because a guy who's as veteran as him, one of the highest IQ wide receivers, it seemed like, in football the last decade, like, it was just probably a mental mistake by him. He knows he probably cost his team the game, but it's football, it's sports. These players know how to compartmentalize, and they'll move on from this.
Couple of quick points with the play. I don't want to belabor it for too long, but I went back and late Thursday night and even into Friday, I watched that play several times, well, more than several. And there were a couple of interesting aspects of it that kind of gave you a hint of what went on there, because Deandre Hopkins was on the field for that play. He only played 15 snaps in the game, and he originally went to the right side of the formation to run the play. And then he started coming back to the left behind the line of scrimmage, and then reversed to go back to the right again. At that point, as he was approaching Kyler Murray, you can see Kyler motioning with his left hand to say, go back, because he had made up his mind then to throw the ball to the right side, and he didn't want DeAndre on that side of the field. So Hopkins did go back. And then you see Kyler with his right hand make a little motion that might have been towards AJ Green. We don't know if he said something that he hoped that Green would hear. We don't know about that. He did make a little motion, but looking at AJ Green, he wasn't looking at Kyler. He was looking at the line of scrimmage to make sure that he didn't leave before the ball was snapped. And so those are a couple things that happened on the play, in addition to Packers linebacker Chris Barnes, who was lined up on the left side a little bit of the left of center on the Packers side of the field. He came clean on a blitz right through the line, is heading towards Kyler, and did a good job of avoiding him. And Kyler actually, after he threw it, ducked a little bit to avoid Chris Barnes. So those were some of the little things that happened on that play that who knows what it affected by. And one other interesting point, Sean Harlow, by all accounts, played a pretty good game at center as the third string center in that game. But overlooked a little bit was that errant snap on 1st and 10 that lost 8 yards. And it was kind of overlooked afterward, because right after that play, Kyler hit Chase Edmonds for an 18-yard gain, or a 22-yard gain, actually, down to the 18-yard line. However, on that bad snap, the Cardinals called timeout, which ended up costing them at the end when they had to use their last timeout at the 5-yard line with 15 seconds to go. If they had had one more timeout there, the play calls might have been a little different. Who knows? Maybe they try a little quick pass but if the player doesn't get in, no problem. They have another timeout. Maybe they try a run there once again with James Conner where the Packers are expecting a pass. So that play, even though they overcame it to get a first down, did cost them a first down. So those are, like I said, a lot of the little things that happened. But let's go back now as we look forward to 2 plays before that final play, when it appears that Kyler Murray hurt his ankle. And now we're all wondering what's going to happen. It's not considered a major injury. It's considered 1 to 3 weeks. A lot depends on the swelling. It's not a high ankle sprain. And so all those things point to the potential of him possibly being able to play this week. None of us know. We'll maybe get a little indication in practice if he practices at all, if it's limited. If he doesn't practice, that might be an indication. But certainly a big decision for Kyler Murray and the Cardinals in terms of what his health is this week in practice and whether he'll be able to play against the 49ers.
Yeah, and Cliff Kingsbury said this week, Kyler has played hurt before. Both of his first couple of seasons, he played injured, and most prominently last year, he played pretty much just the last section of the season after that Seahawks game banged up. So he's done it before. It's obviously not ideal. And, Kingsbury basically said if he can be out there and be effective or play at a high level, I think that's the terminology he always uses. But, basically if he can be not totally Kyler, but mostly there, and be able to sort of protect himself, avoid hits, still make big throws, he'll probably be out there, I would imagine. But if he's really hobbled by this, I don't see why you throw him out there in a week, in a week 9 game against San Francisco when you can rebound, have a couple of weeks, and then the bye. Just give him a little bit of extra time to make sure he's good to go for a final stretch. And, the end of the season, they got some more difficult games. That's, when it's really going to come down to, probably, unless they really get a good head start now. So it's going to be interesting to see what their decision is. But yeah, I mean, if it's a 1 to 2 week injury and it's really sort of borderline, maybe play safe than, better safe than sorry. Throw Colt McCoy out there and see what you can do with it.
Yeah, and the Cardinals built themselves a nice little lead in this division. Like, of course, you got the Rams still there breathing on their neck, but they have 7 wins already in the bag, 6 wins, wherever they're at. So it's not like they can afford a loss or two if Kyler Murray has to step away for these next couple of weeks to get healthy, because in the end, your goal is to win a Super Bowl. It's not to win your week 9 matchup against the 49ers. It's to win a Super Bowl. And like you said, we've already seen this Cardinals team with a compromised Kyler. We saw it last year. And guess what? It wasn't very pretty. This team struggled mightily offensively when Kyler was not the same guy last year. And he's already been dealing a little bit with the shoulder injury as well the last couple of weeks. Now you throw the ankle in there as well. Like, it's basically his whole body getting hurt right now. So it does make me wonder, is this going to be basically the career of Kyler Murray? Are we always going to be kind of worrying, when's that big hit going to come? Or can he finish the season? Like, these are question marks that we had probably entering the draft because he was a smaller guy. And these are question marks we still have right now because through the first few years of his career, he has been a guy that's been banged up every now and then. He's been able to finish seasons, but he's not healthy when he finishes those seasons, and which football players are really. But either way, I think it would be in the best interest of the Cardinals if they decide to sit Kyler Murray for a week or two, because they have a good record right now. And with the way they've been playing this season, I think they have greater expectations toward the end of the year than they do right now.
It's interesting. I featured Dr. David Chow, who has a website, Pro Football Injury or ProFootballDoc.com. And I had a couple stories last week talking about his observations of Kyler Murray and, of course, J.J. Watt's shoulder injury. He's scheduled for surgery. We're not sure when that will be, but he will have surgery. And he told me that he has more concern for this week for DeAndre Hopkins than Kyler Murray, because he feels that with Kyler, that even if he's 85%, there's no real danger of future injury. It's not that serious an injury, and that he should be okay. Hopkins is another story entirely. He only played 15 snaps in that entire game. And when you're dealing with a hamstring, that's one of those that, boy, you can injure and re-injure and aggravate and do all that and make it worse. And so he said he has a little more concern about that. So that'll be something that obviously will be monitored this week for the Cardinals. And one thing I want to get your guys' thoughts on, Millard, you mentioned Zavin Collins earlier, and I think that had an impact on that game more than people realize, because he only played 3 snaps. And we saw how the Packers were able to control the clock. They had over 37 minutes of possession time. They did it essentially, with quick passes, but also with the running game. And that's when Zavin Collins plays most of his snaps, is in the running game. Only 3 snaps. They signed a guy to the practice squad today, Tahir Whitehead, who's played 9 years in the NFL. He's been a run-stopping demon on the inside, whether it's inside linebacker in a 3-4, middle linebacker in a 4-3, whatever it might be. I'm not saying he's going to walk in. He hasn't even been with a team since he became an unrestricted free agent in March, but they signed him to the practice squad, and who knows, he might be a guy that they need out there when they're playing these teams that run the ball well. We know that's what the 49ers do. They love to run the football. So it might be a stretch to think that he might have an impact this week, but we might get a clue in terms of how much Zavin Collins practices when it all begins on Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it might be too quick for Whitehead to get out there, but he is a veteran, and it's interesting. It's like, okay, well, did you sign him for as precautionary, just in case Collins has to miss multiple weeks, just for a guy to have in practice while Collins works his way back later in this week? Or is this a guy who you want to, work up to throw out there if Collins is going to be down. So it's interesting. Maybe just in general, they're not totally satisfied with their run defense, and they wanted an extra body in there, especially now that Watt is gone, or for the foreseeable future at least. We don't know exactly, but you just have an extra guy in there who has done it before. Howard mentioned has been very productive against the run and throughout his career. So it could just be one of a few things. And, we're not going to really know until maybe even the game this weekend. If Collins is out there, if he's not, if they decide to rush, Whitehead into the mix and get him out there. So there's a lot of, options there. And I'm sure Cardinals fans aren't going to want to be like, okay, Tahir Whitehead's going to come save our run defense and help us and fill in for Collins. But, he might be a guy who they're going to end up seeing on Sundays pretty quickly. And so, we'll see. Collins is apparently before the game started, he had some shoulder issues, worked through them, and just re-injured it. I mean, that play, if you go back and watch it, it's in the second quarter. I mean, he lands pretty hard. And so that's a little bit concerning. Young guy, big guy. We'll see exactly what happens there and what his status is on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday leading up to this game.
Yeah, we saw some bad injuries in Thursday night's game. I mean, Robert Tonyan, you had that one collision where they were both basically knocked out of the game. So this was a pretty bad game with injuries. And I think the Collins injury is also so important because of something Alex just touched on is it's when you compound this with the JJ Watt injury, what that does to the run defense, because JJ Watt is a massive human being and it's easy for him to plug up those holes. So if any of those running backs get past the JJ Watt, then you have Zavin Collins there in the secondary in the second level to stop them. But without both of those guys, like Howard mentioned, you saw this running attack really start to wear down this Cardinals defense. A.J. Dillon had a fourth down run where it seemed like he was stopped behind the line of scrimmage and still picked up the first down. Same with Aaron Jones. There was a goal line play where it seemed like he was stood up before it and still was able to power through as well. So this Cardinals run defense is going to be a little bit softer, and against the 49ers team that likes to run the ball, thankfully, it seems like maybe a Jimmy G will be playing Sunday and not a Trey Lance who rushed for 90 yards in the last matchup. But either way, Elijah Mitchell, he's back. He's healthy. He's been running pretty well. Jimmy G is going to put the ball in his hands a lot. And this Cardinals run defense is going to have to step up a lot without J.J. Watt and potentially Collins as well.
No question about that. The great observation. And of course, one other key aspect of the Cardinals offense will be the possibility of Rodney Hudson being back this week. He was designated for return from injured reserve on Tuesday, which means that starts a 21-day window. I'm sure he's not going to be on it that long. It might only be as much as this week that he'll be activated for this game, depending on how he feels. But he's missed 3 where the Cardinals just wanted to be sure not put him out there like they did with Kelvin Beachum when he injured his ribs in the season opener. And then he tried to play the next week, couldn't get past the first half, decided to sit him down for another 2 games, and now he's been playing most virtually all the snaps. So they wanted to be sure with Hudson, and to be careful with him. So it looks like he'll be back, which would be a real pick-me-up, I think, you hope, for the offense, especially with trying to protect Kyler Murray up the middle. If, in fact, he plays, even if it's Colt McCoy, you have to have protection up the middle. And this is a tremendous defensive line the 49ers have. We saw how the Cardinals struggled against them in the game that they won a few weeks ago. They only scored 17 points in that game. And that's going to be a grind and a battle in Santa Clara on Sunday. And that's why it'll be important, I think, to have Hudson back and to have most of your line back to the way it was at the start of the season.
Yeah, I don't think they've gone through an entire game with the entirety of with the starting 5 offensive linemen throughout its entirety, because you mentioned Beachum gets hurt in week 1, tries to play, can't really do it in week 2, and then misses week 3. In week 4, we have multiple injuries with the guards. That's why Max Garcia and Sean Harlow had to come in there. And then it just continues. Week 5, Hudson gets hurt, and then they haven't had him since. So there hasn't been a single game this year where all 5 starting offensive linemen were out there for its entirety. And getting that back at the right time when the rest of the offense is having some injuries, with Murray, you mentioned with DeAndre Hopkins, and so that could be a huge boost for them. And Hudson, not only is he going to help just block the guys up front, but he's, against this 49ers defense with, you mentioned it, they have a lot of guys up front that could really do some damage. He's going to be really, valuable to them as far as pointing everybody out, what they're doing, what coverages they're in. And, if it is Colt McCoy, that's going to be even more important. And if it's, Kyler Murray, obviously with, you don't want him getting hit, and it's going to be vital. Not to mention the snaps. There have been some errant snaps with him gone. Max Garcia took over and, looked pretty solid, but there were a few bad snaps from him. And then last week, obviously, Howard mentioned Deshaun Harlow missed snap at the end of that game. So you might get to a little bit more consistency there with a guy who's played center throughout his entire career versus Harlow and Garcia, who were guards who have had to, switch over to center just because they need the depth.
Yeah, I think this game is going to be won in the trenches. If it's Kyler Murray back there with that injured ankle, you're going to need 6 or 7 offensive linemen, because that is your crown jewel, and you don't want Kyler getting hurt. If it's Colt McCoy, we don't want to see backup quarterbacks with pressure in their face. They usually start throwing it all over the field, usually to the other team when that happens. So Colt McCoy is going to need some good protection as well. And on the other side, like we were saying, 49ers want to run the ball. They do not trust Jimmy G. Who would? Jimmy G is he's an average quarterback. So 49ers want to run the ball, and they like to do those mismatches where they maybe throw it to the running backs in space, or a tight end, over the middle of the field where it's not very deep down the field, maybe 5-yard slants, things like that. So I think this game is going to be won in the trenches, but the guy that I do want to see step up on Sunday for this Cardinals offense is Rondelle Moore, who I feel like his role had just been reduced the last few weeks. It just has not been the same guy that we saw those first couple games in the season. I think he only has one game with at least 30 receiving yards in his last 6 games. So he just has been super utilized. I don't know what word I was trying to say there, but he just has not been super utilized enough recently. An explosive guy with Hopkins potentially hurt, with Kyler Murray potentially hurt. You don't have to do a lot to get this guy the ball. Jet sweeps, little handoffs. You could just do a little slants over the middle of the field. Of course, he muffed a punt return in Thursday's game, which set up the Packers, first and goal. But still, Rondelle Moore, even though he's a rookie, he's an explosive talent. He's no Andy Isabella, and I think he's going to be critical to what this offense can do on Sunday. Sorry, Isabella, just random stray bullet right at you.
And there had been, speaking of Isabella, there had been some speculation that he might be the subject of a trade, that the Cardinals would be moving on. And when I heard that, I said, well, I just don't see where there would be that much of an interest in Andy Isabella. He does have some talent, but obviously he can't even get on the field for this team. But that trade did not happen. So by all accounts, he will be here for the rest of the season. But the trade deadline has come and gone. And the Rams, of course, made noise once again with the acquisition Von Miller from the Denver Broncos, and they gave up 2nd and 3rd round picks, which effectively the Broncos basically paid $9 million for a 2nd and 3rd round pick, because they're paying $9 million of Miller's salary, because there's no way the Rams could have fit him under their salary cap, and they probably don't have anybody left to restructure deals to save money. And so we know that the Rams don't value draft picks. That's obvious. So they gave up a 2 and a 3 for a guy who's past his prime. So we'll see how much he's really able to impact that team. They also are cutting Desean Jackson, who they couldn't figure out a way to get his speed into the offense, which is kind of shocking to me, because he had 8 receptions. That was it in 7 games. He didn't play this past Sunday. He had 8 receptions in 7 games for over 200 yards. And yet they couldn't find a way to get him more involved in the offense. I'm going to be very interested to see what interest there is from other teams, but somewhat quiet. I know there were some Cardinals fans hoping that, maybe they'll get a corner, maybe they'll get a defensive lineman. But the problem is, guys, is when other teams know that you're looking for someone, quite often the price is pretty high. And then you have to also look at how it works into your salary cap in terms of the player you're acquiring. The Cardinals had to restructure one contract already with Jordan Phillips just to fit Zach Ertz in the salary cap. So you just have to be pretty careful about how much money you push into the future by restructuring deals. So I'm sure the Cardinals talked to teams, but there just wasn't probably anything out there that truly made sense from either a draft choice compensation or a contract that you'd be bringing to this roster.
Yeah, the money would be tricky. I mean, they would basically have needed a similar deal that the Rams made for Von Miller, where you give up extra draft compensation, but they handle the burden of the money. But then they would probably be giving up too much draft compensation for a player potentially on a 1-year deal, potentially an older player. I know, Cardinals fans and media speculation is like, oh, maybe they'll get, someone like Fletcher Cox from the Eagles, or maybe they'll get, Shelby Harris, or they'll go after like these defensive linemen to try to replace JJ Watt. But at the end of the day, they looked at it and they probably were like, okay, the asking price is too high for someone like that. The money would get very tricky to try to deal with it, especially this late in the season. And it just wasn't worth it. They're going to roll with the guys that they have. Maybe Whitehead's a guy who comes in there and helps even a little bit. And, the hope is that their young guys continue to perform up front and get better, because if they were going to make a deal, you would think it would likely be for somebody on the defensive line to help, fill up the snaps that JJ Watt was getting. They're solid when it comes to the playmakers. They made sure of that with Zach Ertz. Offensive line is finally getting healthier, unless they really were, troubled by the, Josh Jones's last game. But, Jones has also had some solid games, and he's still a young player. He's growing. And the cornerbacks have looked a lot better than I think anybody thought heading into this season, especially, with Byron Murphy and Marco Wilson and Robert Alford. They've all been solid. So there didn't appear to be a really pressing need in the secondary. So, maybe they took some calls. There were reports that, the Eagles received a lot of phone calls for Fletcher Cox. Maybe the Cardinals were one of them, and it just wasn't able to happen. And that's okay. They, like where they're at right now, but, collectively they still have to get better up front for sure. And a lot of guys are going to have to take on an extra burden, and we'll see exactly what the young guys look like in 5 weeks.
I can't even talk right now. I may talk Cardinals time to time. Man, I'm terrible at talking, but I'm a Saints fan at heart, and the Saints have showed me that money doesn't matter in football. All the cap, everything. It's all imaginary. It's all fake, because I've seen Taysom Hill get a $150 million contract, but it's all voidable years. Like, I don't even know what voidable years mean, but basically all these contracts are fake in the NFL. So the Cardinals want to go out there and get a player. I think they could have. Maybe the compensation and things like that in terms of the draft picks, that stuff can get tricky. But in terms of fitting players under caps, I don't concern myself with that, because I think it's all imaginary at the end of the day when I've looked and seen what the Saints have done the last few years. So for me, throwing out the cap, I really want the Cardinals to get a cornerback. Like Alex said, it may not have been as pressing of a need as I thought coming into the season. Like, this secondary has been pretty surprising. Like, the amount of times they played well, the amount of times they've pulled up, I'm like, I don't see the talent there. But in terms of scheme and their production that they keep putting up, these guys keep performing every week. I love Byron Murphy, but after that, I didn't think these guys were going to hold up, and they keep doing it week after week. So I got to put some respect on their names. But two guys that I thought would have been interesting for the Cardinals to go out there and get: CJ Henderson of the Jaguars. He was like a first-round pick a couple years ago. I don't know what the Jaguars are doing. Urban Meyer, I don't know what that guy's doing up there. So that would have been someone I would have liked to see the Cardinals target. And then the other guy is Stephon Gilmore, who is on I think a bigger deal for this last year, pending free agent pretty soon. So that one could have gotten a little tricky, but I don't think the Panthers even gave up a lot for him. I think he made an interception in his first game like last week or something like that. So those are just two names I think I would have liked the Cardinals to go out there and target. If you're telling me the Cardinals can't get these guys because of money and cap, I don't want to hear it. But if you say it's because of compensation, then I'll put an open ear out.
They would have done that a few weeks ago. They would have. Those guys went quickly as far as
I'll just say this about the cap, because they did have to restructure a contract of Jordan Phillips, of all people, who has hardly given the Cardinals value for the money that they are paying him. And so now they've put even more money that he was supposed to be paid this year by putting it in a bonus. Now they put more money on the cap in future years, and the Cardinals had voidable years and they added more. Phillips already had a voidable year in his contract. They added 2 more to that. And so that's money that's going against the cap. And the one thing I get what you're saying, Millard, for the now, but teams still look at the future. They put spreadsheets, and they have 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. And if you start piling up all that cap stuff that's going to come back in a few years, and you have too much dead money, then it truly impacts what you can do on your roster. And so the good teams know how to balance that. They'll make some moves if they make sense, but they still look to the future and just don't take on a whole lot of money just to bring in a guy that has a name and you're hoping that he's going to play well. And so, we'll see. They're in a pretty good position right now, and I think that's the key. And so, how much would one of those other guys have improved the team? We'll see. We won't know, obviously, but they're confident in the guys that are there. But a key is staying healthy. And that's one of the things that you can't control, obviously, in the NFL. And for the second half of this season, the Cardinals are going to need their players to stay healthy. So we touched on a lot of different subjects. As we wrap up this edition of the All Cardinals podcast, why don't you guys give one last thought on anything you want to talk about here as we wrap this up?
Should we do predictions? Cardinals 49ers, quick score?
If you want to.
All right.
That could be that could be your last note.
All right. All right. I'll give a prediction. Well, are we assuming Kyler's healthy or not? I guess I'll assume.
Well, you can't really assume.
I guess you can't.
You can hedge. You can hedge your pick though, depending on whether you believe he'll play.
But I do think this will be the 49ers week with the Jimmy G back. I think they're just a little bit more stable when Jimmy G's back there. Trey Lance adds a different dynamic and a different element to that offense. But I think they're just more stable right now with Jimmy G back there, a more veteran quarterback. So I'll say this is a more low-scoring game for the Cardinals. 21-14. They're going to, unfortunately, take the L to the 49ers on Sunday.
Ooh, wow. I don't know if I want to
sounded grim after that.
I don't know if I want to give a prediction necessarily, but I will say I don't know if the Saints are the model as far as cap configuration and they had a stressful offseason. They had a very stressful offseason with everything they had to deal with as far as going way over the cap. And then Jordan Phillips has been good the last couple of weeks, and this is where he's supposed to make his money. JJ Watt's out. He's going to be featured prominently up front. They ran a lot of those two defensive linemen sets. They'll probably go back to 3 when they get their nose tackles back, Rashard Lawrence and Corey Peters. But it's going to be a lot of Zach Allen and Jordan Phillips up front. And so this is where if Jordan Phillips were going to earn that money, this would be the time for him to do so. And he's done pretty well for himself the last couple of weeks, I thought, at least. I
would say he's played solid. I'll admit to that. When you're getting paid $10 million a year, to me, you have to play better than just okay and good. And so that'll be a key. But in terms of predictions, I'll tell you, as you asked the question, Miller, are we assuming that Kyler Murray's going to play? We don't know about DeAndre Hopkins. We don't know about Zavin Collins. Very dangerous making predictions on Tuesday when it's early.
Ask me again on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. When it's early in the week. But I will say, I think we're going to see a team galvanized by what happened last Thursday. I think they're still going to play good football. I think the 49ers are not that good. They are great. They are excellent defensively. I don't think they're that good offensively, although they might have George Kittle for this game. So there's another thing that could change things. But I do believe, though, that this game will be very close, just like the last one was. And the 49ers cut their kicker today because it looks like Robbie Gould is coming back to be able to kick for them. So a lot of things that we'll learn about as the week goes on. And all you have to do, though, is come to allcardinals.com for all the news, all the information, all the analysis. It's all at allcardinals.com. So we'll wrap up this All Cardinals podcast. For Millard Thomas, for Alex Weiner, I'm Howard Balzer. Have a good week, everybody. Hey, think of this. It's week 9. There's 18 weeks in the NFL season now. So we are at the official halfway point in the NFL season. So it should be a hell of a ride for the second half of the year. So have a good week.